So we're going to move on to our third part of the evening, which is second chances and forgiveness, if it should exist or not. And we can roll a tape to a clip that expresses second chances or the lack thereof. Please.
Brooklyn. I hope Mike can get us a good deal tonight.
Sure he will.
Sal, Tom, the boss says he'll come in a separate car. He says for you two to go on ahead.
Hell, he can't do that. It screws up all my arrangements.
Well, that's what he said.
I can't go either, Sal.
Tell Mike it was only business. I always liked him.
He understands that.
Excuse me, Sal. Huh?
Tom, can you get me off the hook? For old time's sake.
Can't do it, Sally.
There you have a clip of someone who was not given a second chance. Jewish, by the way, right? Abe Vigoda. He passed away, I believe. Is that confirmed? Okay, no, never mind. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Second chances. We stand in the synagogue Yom Kippur. We ask God to give us a second chance. We're in relationships where hopefully we say, I'm sorry, I'd like a second chance. Do we believe in second chances and giving people second chances? Does it depend on what they've done? Are there degrees of inappropriate behavior where one would no longer be entitled to a second chance? I mean, you have the Harvey Weinsteins and the Matt Lauers of the world, but you have like Al Frankens of the world and people that have done things that are wrong. Could we even make distinctions between wrong and more wrong? How do we handle this? Meaning, moving forward, we're glad the pendulum has swung, and we hope it keeps swinging, but sooner or later, we as a society need to figure out what to do with the hordes of people that have been thrown out of their companies. Do we believe in due process? What do we do now? And should these people go through whatever process it is and get a second chance? Karen, what do we do with them?
Oh, there's so many ways to go at this question. The first thing to really go at is the hordes of people who are being thrown out now are probably minuscule compared to all the women that lost their jobs through all the years and had to take settlements and had to walk away from their careers. And that's truly the bigger group that no one talks about. Where are they and why aren't they getting back? I mean, even one of Neil's marquee clients, Gretchen Carlson, maybe got a great settlement, but she's not back on the air. And that's really what those women spent their life working for. So I'm not sure that that's the right question, but I will say this. One of the biggest impediments to anyone getting a career back is the way in which they internalize what happened and the way in which they apologize for what happened. And the apologies we have seen across the board tend to be incredibly self-involved. Now I've learned, this has been a learning experience for me, as if these women's lives were really intended to just teach them and how,
it was a mentoring relationship, right? They're mentoring.
We see a lot of the word but, I really am sorry, but I grew up at a different time, but I didn't know that's how she felt, but I didn't understand that that's what I was doing, and that stumbling apology, which is literally, even yesterday we were talking about Jeff Fager. Here he is at 60 Minutes. He has had hundreds and hundreds of people have to give him an explanation of why they did what they did when he did stories about them. And even his explanation was about the worst. It wasn't really that I did something bad. I really texted somebody. That's what this was about. Unbelievable. And when you don't understand what you did to these people, when you cannot identify with the pain that they went through, when you cannot identify where their careers are because of actions you've taken, no, you don't deserve a second chance for that. You know, you have to figure out how to figure out what you've done and where that's gone.
Help us out with apologies. Public relations expert Karen, what's the appropriate apology? How should we be standing in
It's all about you.
How should we be
It's
standing
not
in the
about
synagogue
me.
and asking
It's all
for
about
apologies?
you. It's about understanding that what I have done to you, about where your career has gone because of me, what my actions have done to you, my commitment to make your life better, to give you those opportunities that I took from you, or the dignity that I stole from you, or the reputation that I've taken from you, not anything about this has been a learning experience for me, and you know I'm going to be a better person, and it's all about me, because I don't care about you if I've been that victim.
Rosemary, from a legal perspective, is there any reason not to give someone a second chance? If they've gone through whatever process, they've gone to jail, they haven't, they've lost their job, they've lost their income, they want a second chance, they're not tarred and feathered legally.
It depends on what they've done.
Does it matter what they've done?
To me and how I'm going to advise employers.
Because
Whether
there are
you-
many people, let's be honest for a moment, there are many people, and we talked about criminal justice reform a couple years ago, there are many people coming out of prison that want to get jobs that are having a very hard time doing so because no employer is going to hire someone if there's a little box that says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And many people want that box to be removed because we specifically want these people to have a second chance.
So I guess
So do we or do we not?
there are two separate questions here. With your current employer and you've committed sexual harassment, do you deserve a second chance with that employer? That is, you don't lose your job and you get a chance to be a good employee. That depends upon what you've done.
Okay.
There are some things,
Understood.
the guy who drops his pants in the workplace, he doesn't deserve a second chance from that employer. But the guy who gets drunk at a company party, tells some off-color jokes, just enough to cross the line to be actionable sexual harassment. Does he deserve a second chance? A lot of times, yeah. He's going to go through progressive discipline, and he deserves it. You know, it's a much more difficult question when we're talking about someone who has committed a crime, in your example, committed a sexual crime, gone to prison or served some other penalty, and then applies for a new job. Lots of states now have very strict standards about considering criminal history in determining whether you're going to hire someone. So that becomes a much more complicated question, and a lot of the people who call for capital punishment for people who commit workplace capital punishment for sexual harassers are
Workplace
at the same,
capital punishment.
are at the
we'll
same
work with that.
time very much in favor of the statutes and court decisions that say you can't consider criminal history or only in very limited situations. So that, I think, is a much more difficult.
It's an interesting balance. Neil, help us out here. Second chances, what do we do?
You know, it's a funny thing. About 160 million American workers are at-will employees. They can be fired for any reason or no reason except an illegal, statutorily barred reason. Those are the people we represent. They don't have unions. Only 5% in the private sector are unionized. They got nothing. A bunch of rich guys assault women, and we're asking about second chances. We're asking about due process and just cause. You know what? Let's get to that topic later. Let's take care of all the women they've injured. That'll take a few decades. Let's make sure Gretchen Carlson gets a job in the media. We don't have industry retaliation, which is she's suffering right now. Let's make sure all the women who have been assaulted, settled, and then after they settled, they had to leave work, hire them back. Hire them all back, all these women that had to settle and leave while the men stayed. And then when all that's done, and by the way, we give everyone the right not to be fired except for just cause. Then let's talk about these rich guys. They're not suffering like Abe Vigoda. They're sitting there with their millions. They're doing okay.
Rabbi, Jewish law, when it comes to second chances, to rehabilitation, does it matter what the crime was? Would you put someone back in an environment where they could possibly reoffend? I mean, everyone can possibly reoffend. What do you do? Give us some somewhat wisdom here.
There are several issues.
10 minutes left, folks. 10 minutes, we wrap the program
There are
up.
several core issues.
Got my watch. We're good.
There are several core issues. Number one, several of our panelists have addressed the question of sincerity of apology. I found what you said fascinating because under Jewish law and Maimonides and the Code of Jewish Law, the formula, you have to mean it, but the formula is not, oh, I messed up, oh, I had a bad childhood, oh, I drank too much. It is, I have sinned against you and I hurt you and I feel regret for it and please forgive me. It's all about the victim. That's number one. Number two, we are obliged to forgive those who seek forgiveness after they've paid us the appropriate damages and so on, but only if it's sincere, even if they pay the damages. If there's a sense that it's self-serving and not out of a sincere sense of the bad thing that they did to us, not out of a sincere sense of regret that they hurt us, rather than, oh, I want to get back into my job. So we're not obliged to forgive. And certainly if the victim isn't, if the apology and the change in the victimizer is such that the victim is not obliged to forgive according to Jewish law, all the more so we shouldn't be giving them their jobs back or a similar job. That's number one. Number two, there are many cases in Jewish law, it's in the Talmud, in the codes, where someone violates the public trust or the trust of a group of people who might be the public and so on. We do not say, oh, this person apologized because they were found out and paid back what they stole or what they swindled. When the person goes, lives somewhere else, or goes, does something else for a living, and we see that they return a lost object, that they lost money, they act honestly, they engage in a selfless act that costs them money for no benefit to themselves, then we might say this person has changed.
They have to show they're sorry
Right,
instead
they
of say
have
they're
to show
sorry.
that they fundamentally changed without an eye to the cameras. But it goes further.
Not just a
It's-
soup kitchen on Thanksgiving, that's not good enough.
Precisely.
Okay.
I always say all the people who show up to feed people at Thanksgiving think that poor people have different biology than everyone else. Everyone else needs to eat every day. Poor people need to eat once a year. You know. But what's really happening here is another thing. That we say that if, let's say, you know, you weren't that religious and you ate the odd pork chop, and then you become religious, you only eat kosher. So someone who's always ate kosher their whole life can say, you know, I'd love to eat a pork chop, but God told me not to. But someone who's already who did it and now doesn't, shouldn't say that because they actually know what the pork chop tastes like. And the point being that we don't put a person in a position where they have tasted the forbidden fruit, they've gotten away with it, and if there was a long pattern, we say, look, we'll give you another job, but we're not going to let you have this kind of power or do this, because this is also the idea of not placing a stumbling block before the blind.
Not going to let you handle the company barbecue, right?
Right.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And for that matter, we don't, someone who has an alcohol problem, you don't make them in charge of a liquor store.
So you have to be
and so
careful.
on.
Understood.
Last of all, the last point of all this is the benefit of the public. You know, a priest, when the temple was standing, a priest who killed someone, even accidentally, and regretted it and went into exile, did all the things you have to do for manslaughter, can never, ever serve on the altar again. Because the public cannot see that someone who took another life should now seek to atone for us and give us life. The priest can do a million other things. He can't do this. So I would say that there are many cases where we need to make it clear that this abuse and this exploitation is so horrendous that you cannot be in charge of other people ever again.
Well, that's why we have such a high bar for who can qualify to serve in public office. Right. Did everyone here, by the way, I have to throw this in, if anyone saw the eulogy that Joe Lieberman gave for John McCain just last week, so he said over one of John McCain's favorite jokes, which was, there were two inmates in a state penitentiary who were standing on line waiting for dinner, and one turns to the other and says, you know, the food here is really terrible. And the other one says, yeah, it was much better when I was governor. Which goes right back to the point of public trust. Last thoughts, let's start with Rosemary. Give us a minute, your thoughts on the topic, where we've come as a society and where we're looking to go moving forward.
Well, I think that we've come a long way in dealing with sexual harassment. I think that the business community today, as a general matter, is has either achieved or is working very hard to eliminate sexual harassment in the workplace. I disagree with a lot of what Neil has said about the extent of sexual harassment and the seriousness of sexual harassment. Yes, there are too many serious cases that we've seen in the news. But there are a lot of the other litigation that we see involving sexual harassment involves much more minor allegations and does involve some false allegations. So I think that in moving forward and continuing to strive to have workplaces that are free from discrimination and harassment, we have to make sure that we maintain principles of due process for both the people making the allegations and the people against whom the allegations are made, because some of them are true and horrible and some of them are not. We also need to make certain that we don't see the pendulum swing too far in the opposite direction. We have a horrible history going back many years of permitting sexual harassment in the workplace. We're moving away from that, which is a wonderful thing. We don't want to go so far in the other direction that we've eliminated all rights of people who are accused of sexual harassment. We need to find a middle ground where it is legally required and good business to maintain a workplace that respects the rights of all of its employees. I think we're headed in the right direction, both in terms of our statutory law, our cases, both in New Jersey and in the federal courts, and in the requirements that virtually all well-meaning businesses are imposing on themselves and the other businesses they do work with.
Thank you, Rosemary. Neil, last thought.
I think I disagree. I think sexual harassment is pervasive.
We know you disagree.
I think we're in the middle of a backlash. There was a backlash after the women's movement surged in the 1970s. There's a famous book called Backlash. I think the CEO of our nation is part of that. And I think you can see the ugliness of misogyny and that it is pervasive in social media. And I think the legal mechanisms that we have are good, but not adequate. And so when legal mechanisms fail, when victims are forced into secret arbitrations and non-disclosure agreements, it spills over in the form of the Me Too movement, just the way the civil rights movement hit the streets when the courts failed them. To the extent the courts require mandatory secret arbitration and corporations demand non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements in these matters, they are forcing women into extra-legal activity, like the Me Too movement and some of the demonstrations we've seen. And I think it's important for the legal community to respond with much better than we have. Thank you.
Karen.
You know, it's a hard topic for employers to talk about, and that's exactly why employers should be talking about it more and more. And until people feel comfortable addressing this, talking about it, explaining that it's not okay, that that's not the culture of our workplace, there's always going to be those people that are going to assume that they're going to be able to get away with it. And while the words may be tough, and that just means there needs to be more teaching, there needs to be more training, and there needs to be more leadership from the top. And to quote my friend Ginny Long, and until those boardrooms and until that senior management begins to look a little bit more diverse than it does now, or a whole lot more, it's really only going to be incremental change.
Rabbi, last word.
We've heard a lot about legal remedies, agreements, lawsuits, protests, but in the end, the approach of Judaic law and thought has to do with the cultivation of decency within the individual. Jewish law is not couched in you not ought to victimize the person in this way, that this person ought not to be victimized. It's couched in the terms that you ought not to look at a person as a sexual object. You ought to control how you see. You ought to create the boundaries so you can have a respectful professional or social relationship without getting your own wires crossed, even in the primitive male mind, because usually it's the men who are the offenders. You need to make sure that that you are not in a position where you could act on your worst impulses, because you're never alone with someone who you shouldn't be. You're never looking at them a certain way. You're never talking to them a certain way. Professionally, whatever you need to do, you do, but you don't. And Jewish law seems a bit draconian. Many opinions in Jewish law suggest no touching at all.
At all?
Certainly nothing more than a handshake for those who permit it. But you know what? If you're never alone, you never touch, and you never look at a person as an object, but you look at them as a human being who you're interacting with, and that intimacy is negotiated from our perspective, hopefully with the hope of a long-lasting marriage. Sorry to all the divorce attorneys in the room. That's our vision. And the vision begins with the education of the individual. We need to talk less about what you ought not to do to the other and think more, what kind of person should you be? And how do you live with yourself if you're not that person? Because if you don't see the image of God in the other human being, you clearly don't see it in yourself. And why do you want to live with such a person every day?